morning and welcome to Sharper Iron. Spend the next hour with us studying the living and active Word of God, His two-edged sword of law and gospel, recorded for you in Holy Scripture, all about Jesus Christ, crucified, risen, and ascended for you. Thanks for tuning in this morning here on Worldwide KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere. I'm your host, Pastor Timothy Appel of Grace Lutheran Church in Smithville, Texas. Sharper Iron is underwritten by the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, where your investments help support the work of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Visit lcef.org for more information. On this Thursday, February 6th, we are studying Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 38. Jesus' miracles have already shown his power over sickness as one of sin's effects. Today's text will reveal him as the one who has power even over the worst effect of sin, that is, the power even over death. To help us sharpen our faith in Christ as we study God's Word today, we have with us returning guest, Pastor John Bussmann. Pastor Bussmann serves at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Cullman, Alabama. Pastor Bussmann, welcome back to Sharper Iron.
Thanks so much. It's great to be back.
As we get started this morning, Pastor Bussmann, give us some context in Matthew's Gospel. What do we need to know that will help us in today's text?
Well, we've come through what has been called the most famous sermon ever preached, I guess, with the Sermon on the Mount. And in that sermon, we see Jesus displaying himself as the new and greater lawgiver, the new and greater Moses, bringing the Pharisees and the crowds back to what the law is really about. And now, as we begin to shift into this next section, especially here in chapter 9, moving into chapter 10, it's interesting that Jesus really takes on the qualities of a new and greater Joshua as he's going through the land in this conquest of sorts, a conquest not over the Canaanites and Perizzites and all the other groups there, but over the true evils of the land, the sickness, the suffering, and of course, as you've mentioned, even death itself. So it's a really, really neat section here as Jesus takes on these things head on and then moves toward the end of sending his own 12 through the land to do the very same thing.
Maybe I've heard that before, but I don't recall when, or it hasn't been something that's been on my mind previously. I know the part about where we see Jesus being a greater than Moses, but to see him as greater than Joshua too, I think I like that parallel. Can you flesh that out a little bit more as to how we see Jesus? I mean, maybe both parts would be helpful when we think about Moses and Joshua in the Old Testament, how they come together, and then how we see Jesus show himself greater than both. Could you develop that just a little bit more for us this morning?
Sure. We're really quick to compare Jesus and Moses and show how Jesus is the new and greater Moses, especially with, his 5 discourses in Matthew. And, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you these kinds of things. I think that we tend not to want to connect Jesus to Joshua, not that the connection is not there, but as soon as we start talking about Joshua, of course, the idea of conquest comes up, and then you have to get into that touchy subject of, can you believe God would send his people into the land to, kill everybody who was there? And people don't generally know what to do with that without the greater context of scriptures. But as we see that what the conquest of the land was truly about and God's intention there, and then we see Jesus come in and fulfill that in ridding the land of what is plaguing it as a result of the fall. In the Old Testament, we see that it was primarily idolatry, and this ultimately led God's people away from him. But now Jesus hits it head on. And sure, we see idolatry and things like that with the Pharisees, but as Jesus goes to even the least of these, like Jairus' daughter, like this woman with the issue of blood, he's showing what the cleansing of the land is truly all about in creating a new and greater land, this return to Eden, showing us what creation will ultimately be like in the presence of the risen and glorified Christ forever, that sickness certainly has no command over creation anymore. Sin, death, none of it. It's all gone, and Jesus shows us that today in the text. And this conquest, of course, without fail, with leaving no remnant of sin, pain, or death, that he hits it head on for us this morning.
Yeah, I think I like that. I like that a lot. And I think it's a helpful way, as you said, not only to see what's going on here, but then to go back and read, say, the book of Joshua and read it in light of what Jesus does. As a previous guest said, that what Jesus does casts a shadow over the entire Old Testament, and so you're seeing that the shadow of what Jesus is coming to do there, and so to see that even in the book of Joshua, it's just something I never reflected on, and I like it. I'm going to give it some more thought, Pastor Bussmann. So, but we need to look at Matthew chapter 9 here this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and read this text. So Matthew 9, beginning at verse 18. While he, that's Jesus, was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, If I only touch his garment, I will be made well. Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went through all that district. And as Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying aloud, Have mercy on us, Son of David. When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, Do you believe that I am able to do this? They said to him, Yes, Lord. Then he touched their eyes, saying, According to your faith be it done to you. And their eyes were opened. And Jesus sternly warned them, See that no one knows about it. But they went away and spread his fame through all that district. As they were going away, behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke. And the crowds marveled, saying, Never was anything like this seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, He casts out demons by the prince of demons. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. That's our text for the morning, Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 38. So, Pastor Bussmann, as the text that we have today gets started, Jesus comes back to doing miracles again, to showing his divine power. He's had a couple of sections here in Matthew where he's been doing a little more teaching. Now he comes back to that string of miracles. While he was saying these things to them, a ruler comes in, kneels before him. Maybe just to remind us, what has he been saying? How does that relate to what he's about to do here?
Right. I can remember this is one of the first things that we learn as you enter into a text, that the text you're looking at is part of a greater text. And to know what Jesus was saying is very key to what he's about to do. If you back up in the text a little bit, you can see that Jesus gives 2 very, very short parables. One, no one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth in an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. While he was saying these things, in other words, while he was saying the new things are here, open your eyes and see, Jesus says things like, He who has ears to hear, let them hear. While he is saying that the new is here, and there's no greater way to display that the new is here than to show victory over death itself. And this is Matthew's approach to the ruler and his daughter, that the girl is already in the state of being dead. So Jesus is showing us right away that he has power and authority over even death itself.
And so I think you said earlier the ruler here is Jairus. We know that from the other gospel
Right.
writers that this is Jairus, and he comes to Jesus. And what does he want Jesus to do?
So he falls right on his knees, and he wants Jesus to specifically lay his hand on her, and she will live. Just this simple statement: lay your hand on her, and she will live. Do this, and she will rise from the dead.
So the theme of touch is going to become important, I think, in several of these texts as we go forward. So Jesus, he goes with Jairus. His disciples come with him, but he gets interrupted. And he gets interrupted by a woman she's suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years. Why is that account of who she is and what she suffered from? What's the significance of that, biblically speaking?
Right. You can read different commentaries speaking about her medical condition, what it might be, what it's not, and these kinds of things. I don't think that we have any necessarily a doctor's order about what she has, but what the scriptures say about blood is that blood is very, very connected to life, and as she is and has been for the last 12 years, it's very physically, it's evident that she's losing her very life. She's been ceremonially, ritually unclean for the last 12 years, unable to participate with the larger people of God in ceremony and sacrifice and things like this. But it's very, very evident to all who are seeing her that her life is slowly, literally flowing out of her. So you're dealing with a dead girl and a dying woman here in these texts.
So we're invited here, by the way that this account is written, to compare these two women and to see them in a similar light, that one has died and the other one is dying, and Jesus is going to give both of them life by his touch. And that's what this woman with the discharge of blood, she's thinking to herself, I just need to touch him. Is that some kind of a superstition, or is there more going on there?
As people interpret these texts, you could make the case that this woman is seeing Jesus as this kind of miracle man, this healer, as we kind of see the crowds sometimes seeing him, that she has this same kind of idea. But the language of the text seems to make a different case, and it does make a different case. And that's with the language that she uses. And our translations don't always pick this up because it translates these words as healed, as this therapeuo kind of, if I do this, I'll be healed, or Jesus saying, go, your faith has healed you. But underlying in this word, it's not therapeuo, it's sozo, right? It's this saving word. If only I touch his garment, the fringe of his garment, I will be saved. Not I will be made well, but I will be saved, not only delivered from this discharge of blood, but there's this faith that's connected to it. In a very real sense, she already, of course, knows who Jesus is more than just some miracle man. Dr. Veltz would talk about how it's often the minor characters who are these great displays of faith throughout the Gospels, and this is certainly way beyond superstition for her. It's really her faithfulness in knowing who Jesus is and what he's capable of.
Right. She comes to Jesus with faith. Jesus' own answer says that. And so we should not see this woman as one who is somehow superstitious, thinking that if she touches some sort of magical garment or magical person that she will be made well. No, she has faith that Jesus will, in fact, save her. As you mentioned, the Greek verb there is not therapeuo, which you can hear in that the English words that we get therapeutic, right, dealing with the healing of the body. The Greek word there is sozo, which means to save. It's an even greater healing than just the healing of the body. This is a full and complete healing. Think back at the very beginning of the gospel, right? What is Jesus' name and why is he given it? Because he will save his people.
Right.
And this is the faith that this woman has. And Jesus acknowledges that in his answer to her. Take us into that, Pastor Bussmann.
Right. Jesus right away does not condemn the woman for reaching out and touching his garment. He simply turns and looks at her and take heart. Your faith has saved you. Your faith in your text has made you well. Your faith has literally saved you. That's what faith does. Faith doesn't, somehow, if you have more faith or greater faith or anything like this, it doesn't somehow make you a greater candidate for healing. But faith does what it does, and that is save. Not only is she cured from her discharge of blood, readmitted to the community and allowed to take part in sacrifice and all of these things, but she's literally given the greater, what she needs even more than that, and that is salvation, what Jesus has come to bring.
Right, and that is what she receives instantly. I think too that the fact that Jesus calls her daughter is an amazing thing as well, especially given what Jairus has come to Jesus just a moment. My daughter has died, and now here is Jesus calling this woman daughter, one who would have been outside the community as unclean, whose life has literally been flowing away. Now she is restored to life and even called daughter by Jesus. What an amazing gift. As then the text moves on, meanwhile, right, Jesus has been going to the ruler's house, and when he gets to the ruler's house, what's the scene there, Pastor Bussmann?
Oh, it's a busy place. People already know that his daughter has died. The quote unquote professional mourners are already there, playing their music, making a great commotion, as the text lets us know, and for Jesus, they're just in the way. They're in the way. They need to be removed from the scene, and he casts them out. Skipping ahead to 25, the text says he puts them outside, but this is the word to throw something out. It's not just a scooting people out of the way. He's literally throwing them out because they're in the way of what he's about to do. But the thing that gets me about these people, these aren't people who are confused about what death looks like. It's not, maybe the girl wasn't really dead, or maybe she had just slipped into a coma or something like this. I mean, these are people who are around death all the time. They're not confused about what death looks like. They know exactly what has happened to this girl, and this is why they give the reaction they give to Jesus when Jesus said, go away, the girl is not dead, but she's sleeping. You can see them kind of roll their eyes at him as, who is this guy? You've got to be kidding me. This is death. This is what it looks like. And, many of your listeners, and even beyond people in the Lutheran Church, we all know what death looks like too. We come face to face with it probably more often than we like. So you think about that. If we were to walk into a funeral home or something like this and say, oh, they're not dead, they're just sleeping, you just kind of raise up and gasp. Who does this person think they are? This is, of course, death. It's obvious. But Jesus, again, has power, authority over death, and his word most certainly brings life to death, creates, does all of these things. So what Jesus says, of course, goes here.
I want to focus in on Jesus' words there a little bit more, where he says that the girl is not dead but sleeping. And as you said, I mean, these mourners, they know that this girl really is dead, and she is really dead. I mean, we need to say that she has actually died. She's not in a coma, or she didn't faint or something like that, but she is actually dead. So why does Jesus say that she's just sleeping? What's the bigger point? And I think what's the hope that we have here in these words of Jesus, Pastor Bussman?
And you have to love the way the New Testament does this all over with death. And Jesus even has to clarify this for his own disciples with the raising of Lazarus, right? They're confused. Jesus, after he waits for 4 days, he tells the disciples that Lazarus has fallen asleep, and the disciples are confused, and they say, well, if he's sleeping, he'll surely get better. And he has to actually clarify to them and tell them more up front, look, he's dead. Let's go. But the New Testament all over the place, Paul does this too, equates death with sleeping. Not that we're lying there sleeping and are going to wake up, but it does give us hope. As soon as we see a sleeping person, that person's going to get up. And what comfort that gives to a Christian to look at death that way, not just to say, well, it's death, it really doesn't matter. The New Testament also calls this an enemy. Right? The last enemy to be defeated, destroyed, is death. But in the midst of the hurt, in the midst of the grief, in the midst of the pain, to know that we have a God who has power over that, simply through his word, through his reaching out, actually in the midst of it, not a shout down from the heavens, but actually coming into the midst of this little girl's house, stretching out his hand, entering into her very own death, and raising her up.
Just to speak to that hope, you pictured it earlier as if, what if you or I or someone walked into a funeral home and said of the person lying in the casket, this person is not dead but sleeping. Imagine the shock on people's faces. And yet, as Christians, and especially as pastors, you and I, Pastor Bussman, this is what we preach at a Christian funeral, right? That the person is sleeping, that Christ will come and wake them up. Is it? I mean, that's the hope that we still proclaim as Christians today, isn't it?
This is absolutely the hope that we have, and we sing it. We sing it at Easter: "Awake, O sleeper, rise from death." And again, that's not to take away from grief. That's not to say that it's a sin or something to be sad, but it's to give us that comfort, give us that hope that we don't, the scriptures speak this way too, that we don't grieve like others who have no hope. I mean, look, this ruler, like you said, called Jairus by other gospels, he's not just sitting there, wallowing in the floor. He knows exactly where to go. And he goes straight to Jesus. Jesus has the authority, the power to raise this girl from the dead. Jairus knows it, and that's where his hope lies. Same for us.
Right. Yeah. To look to the one who is able to look at this worst enemy that there is. Right. As you said, death is the enemy, but Jesus is able to look at that worst enemy of all, death, and call it a mere sleep because of what he has done, because he has undone death, and on the last day we know that enemy will be put under his feet once and for all, and that's the hope that we have as Christians, that for us death has been defeated by Jesus. This greatest enemy of all is now asleep, something that is, as you said very well, when you look at someone who's sleeping, they're going to get up. So when you look at a Christian who's died, they're going to get up. They will rise on the last day with Christ. And that is our hope as Christians still today. And Jesus, he brings a foretaste of that to this girl, to Jairus's daughter here in Matthew chapter 9. And it's, I mean, goodness, if I saw this happen, Pastor Bussmann, I think I would report about it too, which is how Matthew ends the account of this raising of the little girl, that the report of this went through all that district. So what's the report that's going out?
Right, and that's the big question. Who's reporting and what are they reporting? And it seems like the report that goes out is, even if it's as simple as Jairus' daughter is raised, or my daughter is raised, or I was bleeding for 12 years and now I'm not bleeding anymore, that report is going out. But I guess another question could be asked, how was the report then received? And it hits people's ears much differently. And, I guess their interpretation of then who Jesus is as a result of that is really what throws you into the remainder of the text, because we're going to see people react to these things much differently, as we'll see. Is Jesus just a miracle worker that they had seen before? By whose authority is he doing these things? Or is he actually maybe God who's come into the creation, made his dwelling among us, or to remain Messian about it, Emmanuel, God with us in this place even now. So the rest of these texts will begin to sort that out.
And we will pick that up on the other side of the break. You're listening to Sharper Iron here on Worldwide KFUO, looking at the last part of Matthew chapter 9 with Pastor John Bussmann. We're going to take that break, but we'll be right back. Please stick around.
Since 1978, Lutheran Church Extension Fund has had the humble privilege of supporting Lutheran Church Missouri Synod ministries and her workers. Thanks to faithful investors, LCEF has provided thousands of church workers, congregations, schools, and organizations with the low-cost loans and resources they need to reach more people with the saving name of Christ. To learn more, visit lcef.org or call 800-843-5233, 800-843-5233.
Welcome back to Sharper Iron. On this Thursday, February 6th, we're studying Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 38 with Pastor John Bussmann of St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Cullman, Alabama. Pastor Bussmann, prior to the break, we left off after the report of what Jesus has done for Jairus' daughter, for the woman with the discharge of blood. That has gone out. That goes out. Jesus continues traveling. And as he continues traveling, Matthew tells us that two blind men follow Jesus, and they cry out a title for Jesus that we haven't heard in quite a while in Matthew's gospel. How do these two blind men address Jesus?
Yeah, verse 27, two blind men, have mercy on us, Son of David. This is the first time he's referred to as the Son of David, or called by this title, since the very first verse of the very first chapter of Matthew. So what does that mean? Calling him the Son of David, does it mean that rightly that he is not only indeed the promise carrier, but the promise fulfiller, who will, as David had wanted to do, build God a house, literally as Jesus says, he is the new and greater temple, the fulfiller of the everlasting covenant. What goes through people's mind when they hear Jesus is the Son of David, the reestablisher of the throne? But these people know who Jesus is, the Son of David. And it's probably the great irony of this text, is the first ones to recognize Jesus haven't even seen a thing. The Pharisees see everything that Jesus is doing. They certainly hear everything that Jesus is preaching, but they're the very ones to become spiritually blind, as it were.
So these two men, and I guess we should say, Pastor Bussmann, that they've heard this report or maybe other reports that are going out about Jesus, and that's why they're labeling him the Son of David, this very messianic title.
Right. They can't literally see, but the word, and again, like I said before, how is the word received? These blind men are receiving that word with faith, not necessarily craving Jesus to just do signs and wonders because they like to see them or because they're hungry and want more bread or something like this. They come to Jesus in faith, as the text will tell us.
So they go into the house with Jesus, and he asks, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" They say, "Yes, Lord." And he touches their eyes. And again, we have Jesus touch. We've seen this in several of the miracles that he's done. What's the significance of Jesus' touch here?
Right, he touches them. Other areas of this gospel and even other gospels tell you that Jesus might speak in the presence of somebody, or that he doesn't even have to be there. He may just tell somebody to go, that, oh, your daughter is well. Jesus doesn't have to touch them in order for them to be healed. But the significance that Jesus is not distant, this Messian theme, Emmanuel, God with us in the midst of this suffering, in the midst of this pain, disease, even death, but not only in the midst, but literally stretching out his hand and taking it from them. This is what's so offensive to Pharisees, Sadducees, is that, if Jesus is touching these people who are blind, touching these people who are bleeding, touching these people who are dead, he's the one who becomes unclean. You'll notice oftentimes that after these things take place, that Jesus is not able to enter into any towns. And I think we just automatically assume that's because of how many crowds are following him. But the people are seeing him as maybe a miracle worker, but he's certainly an unclean miracle worker. You can't just go around touching all of these people without consequence. But he does. He goes to even the most unclean and does the same thing for them, not because he has to, but because he's demonstrating something far greater, that he is literally bearing their diseases, bearing their ailments, and eventually going to take them straight to the cross.
As we heard in Matthew chapter 8, where Matthew quoted from Isaiah chapter 53, that he took our illnesses and bore our diseases, and we continue to see him do that here for these two blind men. He touches them, says, according to your faith, be it done to you. There's that word faith again. This is not superstition, but faith in Jesus, and here is the Son of David. Their eyes are opened, and then we get another one. This is not the first time we've encountered this in Matthew's gospel, but it's unusual, at least to our ears, I think, every time we hear it. Jesus tells these two men not to say anything about what's happened. Why would Jesus do that?
Right, so some people would say that Jesus is using simple reverse psychology, that he really wants them to tell them. So he's saying, don't say anything, so that they'll actually go out and say that. But that's a pretty slippery slope if we're all of a sudden applying reverse psychology to some of the things that Jesus says. So we don't want to go there. But this word is going out that what has happened? Well, Jesus is doing miracles, doing this, doing that. The word that goes out about Jesus needs to remain that he is Emmanuel, God with us. Most importantly, they're calling him the Son of David. What does that mean? Does that mean that he's going up to Jerusalem to restore the literal physical throne there in the to the house and the lineage of David? Or does it mean something else? what does the reign and rule of God actually look like? So as Jesus is sternly charging people not to anyone, perhaps he's avoiding false ideas about what the reign and rule of God actually is. And that as we saw and as we have seen about faith, not necessarily about miracles, it has to do with the forgiveness of sins more so than eliminating the Romans out of Jerusalem. And this is elsewhere in the Gospels as well. My mind goes to the paralytic, which is in the beginning of Matthew 9. Before Jesus ever tells him to rise, take up his bed, and go, he gives him the forgiveness of sins. This is what the reign and rule of God is about. Forgiveness, life, salvation. Nothing about Romans, in other words.
I think that answer makes good sense right here, particularly because, as you pointed out, for the first time since the very beginning of the gospel, Jesus has been called Son of David, and that would have been a pretty loaded term for a lot of the people hearing it. There would have been tons of different expectations swirling around as to what that would have meant. It would have excited some people for all the wrong reasons. And so in this case, it does seem to be quite plausible that Jesus would say, I'm not ready for that right now. This is not the time for all the events leading to his death and his resurrection, as we know they're coming towards the end of Matthew's gospel. And so here he says, don't say anything right now, because he doesn't want those false expectations. That seems a very good explanation right here. Of course, these two blind men don't listen. they go and do what Jesus said not to. I mean, they're disobeying Jesus. This question was posed to me once, Pastor Bussmann, and I don't know if I'm not sure exactly how to answer it, but was that the right thing to do? Or was that like, I don't want to tell people not to tell people about Jesus today, but the disobedience here, what do we make of this?
Right. You don't want people to not speak of Jesus, but you also don't want people to speak of Jesus incorrectly. And so we certainly don't want to discourage evangelism. And I think there are many people in churches who don't, quote unquote, evangelize because they might be afraid of saying the wrong thing or not knowing what to say. But if we look here, Jesus isn't talking about, some sort of inward workings of the Trinity or two natures in Christ or something like this. This is very basic. This is creedal. This is simply who Jesus is and why he has come. And this is what we teach to our children from day one. Who is Jesus? He is God. Why has he come? To take away the sins of the world. And as people go and spread this news throughout the region, this is the very simple thing that the people don't get. Ultimately, it's why they choose Barabbas instead of Jesus. He's proven against the Romans, right? And this is not the reign and rule of God that Jesus has come to bring. Not the reign and rule of God certainly not the one that they want, and as you look back at David, it's really interesting that these blind men should cry out for mercy and call him the Son of David at the same time. One of these deep tracks back in 2 Samuel chapter 5 is as David is about to send his men into Jerusalem to take Jerusalem from the Jebusites. They're going to go through that dry water shaft and pop up in the middle of the city. The Jebusites' defense against David was to line the city with the lame and the blind, and the text goes on to say because David hated the lame and the blind. We don't know why David hated the lame and the blind, but the text is very clear that he does. So this new and greater Son of David approaches the blind much differently than than David does, not through killing, but through, again, making alive through faith that they now can see.
That bringing up of 2 Samuel chapter 5 there, which I'd forgotten about, but yeah, it's there. Is I think it's helpful then when we think about, well, what does the reign of this son of David look like, and what does he come to do? Here is one who is greater than even David, who reigns perfectly as king. So I appreciate that. So then as the text continues, we've got more people coming, right? So they're going away. Here go the two men who are blind that can now see. And here comes someone else to Jesus. And this one is a demon-oppressed man who's mute. What's happening here next, Pastor Bussmann? We're in verses 32 and 33.
Yeah, we're getting to all the groups here. Demon-oppressed man who's also mute. And the demon was cast out, and the mute man spoke. This is a lot of times in Jesus' miracles and things like this. There are always more details than we want. You look at even the man born blind in John chapter 9, and the healing is over in a matter of verses, and the rest of the chapter is about the response to that. It's like, well, wait just a minute. How did it happen? Who is this guy, demon oppressed man? What was he doing when he was demon oppressed? How many demons were there? We don't get any of those details. You're given a person with a problem, and a severe problem, a community outcasting problem, and right away it's taken care of. No questions, nothing. Jesus takes care of him right away. Demon cast out, mute man spoke, and then we finally start to get the reactions from the people. First the crowds, and then the Pharisees here.
You're right. So we've seen some reactions in the past. They've kind of faded into the background a bit, but now Matthew brings them out once again. So he tells us first about the crowds. He says that they marvel. Well, what does that convey to us? And then what do they say, Pastor Bussmann?
Yeah, it's interesting. Crowds marveling. We would expect with the reactions for everybody else that it might say the crowds believe, the crowds have faith, but they are marveled. They're wowed at this. And that kind of gets you back into what's the report that's going out about Jesus? Why are the crowds there? And we can start to ask those questions, and maybe not necessarily answer those questions with these texts, but we can begin to look at the crowds a little differently and see what they're actually doing here. So the crowds are marveling. Why? Because, no one has ever done anything like this. Never was anything like this seen in Israel, right? They've seen or heard through the scriptures a lot. You go back to, beginning at 1 Kings 17 and work all the way through the beginning of 2 Kings, and you see all the works of Elijah and Elisha, and there's a ton there. And a ton there that Jesus, too, is doing, like multiplying food and not only raising people from the dead, but raising widows' sons from the dead. A lot of things that are going on have been similar and point Jesus to being a prophet, a new and a greater prophet. But all of these other things, blind people seeing, demons being cast out, they haven't seen any of this before. So they know something is different about Jesus. His power, his authority is certainly greater than all of these others. But they don't quite know what yet.
The Pharisees, on the other hand, it sounds like they have their minds made up. How does Matthew introduce their reaction?
The Pharisees are Right. They've got their mind made up. The Pharisees are not on Jesus' side hardly ever. Now, there are a couple instances where they come to him and are trying to feel him out, trying to figure out, which school of thought he's coming from. But most of the time we see the Pharisees coming to Jesus in order to trap him or to get him twisted up in his words. And here, there's no conversation between them. They're not, just kind of standing in the background, following around, trying to figure out what's going on. They've got their minds made up. They've got everything figured out. He casts out demons by the prince of demons. That's it. That's the easiest explanation. Nobody can argue with us. This is just Satan. He's got power too. And Jesus is that's where he's getting all of his power straight from the devil.
And Matthew's going to bring that back out. This accusation against Jesus will come back into play later. Jesus will deal with it a little more forcefully later. For the time being, though, as Matthew continues his narrative, now he's preparing us for the second big discourse that Jesus will give in chapter 10. And so he's getting ready to move into that. And now the miracles that he's done stand as the background, but Jesus is going to do something now. He keeps teaching, right? He keeps traveling and healing. And he looks at the crowds, and what's his reaction to the crowds that he sees, Pastor Bussmann?
You love it. Even if the crowds are simply marveling and maybe they're believing, maybe they're not yet believing. But Jesus doesn't leave them out. He doesn't leave them alone. He continues to go to every city and village. He continues to enter into the synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of his reign and rule, what it truly is, what it truly means that he is Emmanuel, that he is here in the flesh. In verse 36, he sees the crowds, and he has compassion. He's literally physically moved by seeing these crowds because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. You go back and you look at the reaction. If the Pharisees are going to come so violently against Jesus that they're basically saying that he's working through Satan, right? They can't deny what's happening. It's very, very evident to them that something is happening. But if they're coming at Jesus so strongly, how in the world are they going to come at just a random passerby? We see later that they're devouring widows' houses and things like this. They have no compassion, as Jesus has on anyone. This is, Jesus is not randomly talking about sheep and shepherds and all of this. John probably more fully brings this out in chapter 10. But Jesus is going back all the way to Ezekiel. The woe to the shepherds. They're not taking care of anybody. They're only looking out for themselves. And God has a great promise there in that Ezekiel text too. I myself will search for my sheep. I alone will seek them out. And here Jesus is doing that very thing. He sees the crowds and he has compassion on them. Not just sheep without a shepherd, but harassed and helpless. It's not that they're just kind of hanging out on a hillside, not knowing what to do, but they're actually being pursued. They're being harassed, and there's no one to save. This also doesn't exclude just a quote unquote random passerby, a random person in the crowd. You don't have to be blind. You don't have to be demon possessed. You don't have to be dead or have an issue of blood for Jesus to show up into your house. And he has compassion even on the greater crowds.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. As Jesus, he recognizes that the hatred that the Pharisees have expressed toward him, that's been harassing these crowds, and so he has compassion on these crowds, and then he speaks to his disciples, which is going to lead us then into chapter 10. Pastor Bussmann, what does Jesus say to his disciples here at the end that closes out Matthew chapter 9?
All right, so this is going to circle us back around to one of the original comments I made about Jesus being the new and greater Joshua, because he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send the laborers out into the harvest. And this is the very thing that he's going to do in chapter 10. Instead of sending 12 tribes into the land, he's sending 12 apostles into the land to do this very thing, this new conquest, not through killing, but through making alive. And there's always a need for more, right? It can't just be 1 or 12. The harvest is plentiful, and the harvest, right? It's not. There's plenty of fields to be sown. It's harvest time, and we need laborers to get to work.
Pastor Bussmann, we just have about 3 minutes here left on the morning. Any points that we didn't hit that you'd like to bring up or summarize for us, bring things home for us today?
Well, I guess the biggest thing here in the text is not necessarily getting wrapped up in the miracles. They're important, right? But what is the text saying? What's the confession about Jesus? Who is he? We go back to the genealogy in the beginning. He's the Son of David. He's Lord. He's Christ. He's Emmanuel. Not only has he come to bring restoration to the land, restoration in body, but more importantly, the forgiveness of sins, so that the restoration that some may have in the body today is not only for today. Jairus' daughter died again sometime in the first century, but because of faith, yet she will live again. So always pointing us to who Jesus came to be, yet still is, as living and reigning Lord, Son of David, our own Emmanuel.
Pastor John Bussmann is the pastor at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Cullman, Alabama, helping us this morning with Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 38. Pastor Bussmann, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Who is Jesus? He is the one who has power even over death. For a young girl who has died, for an older woman who has been losing her life over the course of 12 years, Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Who is Jesus? He is the Son of David, the promised fulfilled, the true King over Israel, the one who reigns with the forgiveness of sins and the promise of resurrection and life everlasting. Who is Jesus? He is the one who has power over demons. Who is Jesus? He is the good shepherd, the one who sees the crowds and has compassion on them, whose heart goes out to them. And so he sends for the preaching of his word. That's who Jesus is. I'm your host here on Sharper Iron, Pastor Timothy Appel of Grace Lutheran Church in Smithville, Texas. Thanks for spending the morning with us. Talk to you again tomorrow.